The moment a mafia boss stops a room full of powerful men, everyone knows something impossible has just happened. I never imagined that impossible thing would be me. 1 second, I was hurrying across the marble ballroom with a medical kit clutched against my side, trying to ignore the dizziness that had followed me through the last 18 hours of double shifts at County General Hospital, and the next the lights above me blurred into streaks of gold. The music faded. My knees gave out without warning. I remember hearing a glass shatter somewhere in the distance before everything dissolved into darkness. The first thing I felt was a steady hand catching me before I reached the floor. When I forced my eyes open, the grand ballroom had fallen completely silent. Hundreds of guests stood frozen beneath crystal chandeliers, but no one was looking at me. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the man kneeling beside me, Damian Moretti. Even before that night, I knew his face. Everyone in New York did. Officially, he was a respected businessman whose investments stretched across the city. Unofficially, people lowered their voices whenever they mentioned him. He was the mafia boss who ruled the Moretti family with quiet authority, a man whose decisions shaped an entire hidden world without ever needing to raise his voice. I tried to pull away, embarrassed that I had interrupted whatever important gathering surrounded us. "I am fine," I whispered, although my voice barely sounded real. As I pushed myself upright, my cardigan sleeve slipped toward my elbow. Cold air brushed against my skin. Purple and yellow bruises circled my wrist, with older marks fading beneath newer ones. I reached to cover them, but I was too late. Damian had already seen everything. He did not ask who caused them. He did not offer sympathy. He simply looked at the bruises, then slowly lifted his eyes toward the crowded ballroom. His expression never changed, yet the atmosphere around him somehow became even colder. He stood with calm precision and spoke only 4 words. "No one leaves here." Nobody questioned him. Conversations ended instantly. Security teams moved without hesitation, quietly sealing every entrance while the orchestra stopped playing in the middle of a song. Several distinguished guests exchanged nervous glances, but none of them protested. That was the kind of authority Damian carried. He never needed to threaten anyone. His certainty was enough. I stared at him in confusion. "Why are they closing the doors?" I asked. He looked toward the massive entrance where one security monitor displayed live surveillance footage. "Because someone left too early," he answered. Within seconds, one of his captains approached and quietly handed him a tablet. Damian watched a short video clip showing a man in a gray coat leaving through the east exit exactly 8 seconds before I collapsed. The stranger never looked back, yet he seemed strangely familiar. Damian studied the screen for another moment before returning it to his captain. "Find out who he is," he said calmly. "Do not approach him yet. I want to know who he reports to." The captain nodded once and disappeared into the crowd. I looked back at Damian, completely lost. "This has nothing to do with me," I said softly. His eyes met mine for the first time. They were calm, unreadable, and frighteningly focused. "That," he replied, "is exactly what I intend to prove." When I opened my eyes again, the music had been replaced by silence. I was lying on a leather sofa inside a private medical suite hidden behind the ballroom, the kind reserved for guests whose names never appeared on public lists. A physician finished checking my pulse before offering a reassuring smile. "You are dehydrated, exhausted, and running on almost no sleep," he said. "You need at least a full day of rest." I almost laughed. Nurses did not simply decide to rest whenever life became difficult. Bills still arrived. Patients still needed care. I thanked him anyway and slowly reached for my cardigan, immediately pulling the sleeve over my wrist before anyone else could notice the bruises again. The door opened quietly. Damian Moretti entered alone. The physician stepped aside without waiting to be asked, leaving the room as though the decision had already been made. Damian remained near the window overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Even standing still, he carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that changed other people's lives. He did not waste words. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Embarrassed," I admitted. "I interrupted your meeting." "The meeting can be rescheduled," he replied. "Certain questions cannot." I lowered my eyes. "If this is about my arm, it is nothing. I did not ask about your arm." The answer caught me off guard. He reached into his jacket and placed my employee identification badge, my wallet, and my phone on the table beside me. Every item had been carefully collected. Nothing was missing. "Your belongings," he said. "Thank you." I slipped the phone into my pocket and stood carefully. My legs still felt weak, but I refused to look fragile in front of him. I should go. Damien studied me for a long moment before speaking again. Someone left the ballroom 8 seconds before you collapsed. I frowned. That could be anyone. Perhaps. His voice remained perfectly calm. Perhaps not. Before I could answer, one of his captains entered carrying a secure tablet. He leaned close enough to quietly deliver a report. Damien listened without interrupting, then accepted the tablet and reviewed several surveillance photographs. His expression never revealed what he was thinking. Finally, he handed the device back. Continue watching, he instructed. No contact. I want to know where he goes, who he meets, and who gives the orders. The captain nodded once and disappeared. I stared at Damien. You think someone was following me? I think someone wanted to be close enough to watch you without being noticed. A chill ran through me. Why would anyone watch an emergency room nurse? That, he answered, is the wrong question. I folded my arms, trying to steady my breathing. Then what is the right question? Damien walked toward the door before stopping with one hand resting on the handle. Who benefits if your life suddenly crosses mine? He left without another word. Less than a minute later, my phone vibrated. An unknown number had sent only one photograph. It showed me leaving County General Hospital 3 days earlier. Standing across the street was the same man in the gray coat who had walked out of the ballroom just before I collapsed. Beneath the picture were 6 simple words. You have been watched for weeks. The photograph stayed in my mind long after I left the hotel. I drove home with the windows cracked open, hoping the cold night air would clear my thoughts. But every traffic light felt different now. Every parked car looked suspicious. Every stranger seemed to linger a little too long. I kept telling myself Damien Moretti had misunderstood the situation. There had to be another explanation. I was an emergency room nurse who worked exhausting shifts, paid rent on a small apartment, and worried about grocery prices more often than anything else. My life was ordinary. Why would anyone spend weeks watching someone like me? The following morning, I reported for another 12-hour shift at County General Hospital. The emergency department was already overflowing before sunrise. Ambulances rolled in one after another. Phones rang without stopping, and every hallway carried the familiar mixture of urgency and controlled chaos. For several hours, I almost forgot everything that had happened. Helping frightened families and comforting nervous patients had always grounded me. Then I saw him again. Through the glass doors near the visitor entrance stood the same man wearing the gray coat. He pretended to read a bulletin board, but every few seconds his eyes drifted toward the nurse's station. The moment our eyes met, he calmly turned and disappeared outside. I rushed to the entrance without thinking, but by the time I reached the sidewalk, only morning traffic remained. Across Manhattan, Damien Moretti stood inside the secure operations room beneath the Moretti estate. Multiple screens displayed financial reports, surveillance feeds, shipping routes, and encrypted communications. Around the long conference table, his senior captains waited quietly while analysts reviewed the latest intelligence. One investigator projected several photographs onto the wall. Every image showed Ryan, my boyfriend, meeting different people over the past 4 months. 6 unexplained cash deposits, the investigator reported. Each payment moved through shell companies connected to Bellini interests. No one spoke. Damien studied every photograph before asking a single question. Does Ryan know who pays him? The investigator shook his head. We believe he only follows instructions from an intermediary. Damien nodded slightly. Then he is not the architect. He is the doorway. Another captain entered carrying fresh intelligence. Boss, another confidential shipment schedule was compromised overnight. Damien remained perfectly composed. The leak came from inside. Yes. Then we continue exactly as planned. One captain looked surprised. We already know someone is stealing information. Why not stop the shipments? Damien folded his hands behind his back. Because the shipment is no longer the objective. Finding the traitor is. The room fell silent again. Every person understood that their mafia boss was thinking several moves ahead. He was not reacting to events. He was quietly shaping them. Meanwhile, I returned to my duties, but the uneasy feeling refused to disappear. Near the end of my shift, my phone vibrated with another anonymous message. There was no greeting and no explanation, only a photograph taken less than 10 minutes earlier. It showed me standing beside an ambulance outside the emergency entrance. Across the street, barely visible in the reflection of a storefront window, stood the same gray-coated man. Underneath the image was another sentence. He is only watching because someone else is waiting. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the anonymous photographs instead of my own memories. By sunrise, I had almost convinced myself that fear could be ignored the same way exhaustion could. I was wrong. As I walked toward County General Hospital before my morning shift, the familiar gray-coated man stood across the street pretending to read a newspaper. He never looked directly at me, yet I could feel his attention following every step I took. The instant I entered the hospital lobby, he folded the newspaper and disappeared into the morning crowd. I hurried outside only seconds later, but he was already gone. The only thing left behind was the uneasy feeling that someone wanted me to notice him without ever allowing me to catch him. Several miles away, Damian Moretti stood inside the secure strategy room beneath the Moretti estate, surrounded by digital maps, surveillance reports, and financial intelligence gathered throughout the night. Around him sat the senior captains responsible for every district under the Moretti family. No one interrupted while Damian reviewed the latest updates. One analyst finally broke the silence. The gray-coated observer appeared near County General again this morning. He maintained visual contact with Claire Bennett for exactly 11 minutes before leaving. Damian nodded once. Continue surveillance. No contact. Another captain stepped forward carrying a confidential report. The false transportation schedule has been uploaded exactly as instructed. Damian accepted the document without changing expression. Good. Let it spread. One younger captain looked confused. Boss, if the information reaches Bellini, they will know our routes. Damian calmly folded the report. The routes are false. The room became completely silent. Someone inside this organization believes they are stealing genuine intelligence, he continued. When they deliver it, they will reveal the channel we have been searching for. Nobody questioned him further. Every person understood that their mafia boss was not chasing the enemy. He was allowing the enemy to expose themselves. Meanwhile, I finished another exhausting shift and drove home beneath a sky heavy with rain clouds. The parking lot outside my apartment looked exactly as it always had, yet something felt different. My front door was closed. My mailbox was untouched. Even the hallway remained quiet. I unlocked my apartment and stepped inside cautiously. Nothing appeared missing. My books remained on the shelves. My coffee mug still rested beside the sink. Then I noticed my bedroom window standing slightly open. I was certain I had locked it before leaving that morning. A chill ran through me as I slowly crossed the room. Resting neatly on the windowsill was a plain white envelope with no address and no stamp. Inside was a single photograph taken from outside County General Hospital earlier that day. I was standing beside an ambulance speaking with another nurse. Across the street, reflected in a store window, stood the gray-coated man. Written beneath the photograph were 7 carefully typed words. You are standing closer than you realize. My phone rang before I could think. The caller identification displayed only one name. Damian Moretti. I answered immediately. Do not touch anything, he said in the same calm voice that never seemed to change. We found the person who entered your apartment. I need you to leave now because this is no longer only about you. My heart was pounding so hard that I almost dropped the phone. I stepped back into the hallway exactly as Damian instructed, leaving the apartment door open behind me. The corridor felt strangely quiet. Every apartment looked ordinary. Every light glowed the same warm yellow. And yet nothing about the evening felt ordinary anymore. Less than 6 minutes later, 2 black sport utility vehicles pulled up outside my building. Several men in dark suits entered without drawing attention to themselves. They moved calmly, speaking through discreet earpieces while politely asking nearby residents to remain in their apartments for a few minutes. Then Damian Moretti arrived. He was still wearing the same charcoal suit from earlier that day, his expression as composed as ever. He gave me a brief nod before walking straight into my apartment. No unnecessary questions. No dramatic reactions. Only careful observation. One of his security specialists examined the bedroom window while another photographed the envelope and the anonymous picture without disturbing anything. I stood near the doorway watching them work with astonishing precision. They behaved less like bodyguards and more like experienced investigators following a carefully planned procedure. After several minutes, One of the specialists approached Damien holding a tiny object sealed inside a transparent evidence pouch. "Boss," he said quietly. This was hidden beneath the bookshelf. Damien looked at the object for only a second before asking, "Active?" "No. The battery died recently." I stared at the small device in disbelief. "What is it?" The specialist answered gently. "A listening device." The words drained every remaining trace of warmth from the room. I suddenly remembered every late-night phone conversation, every argument with Ryan, every quiet moment spent wondering how my private life always seemed to become someone else's information. Damien carefully studied the device before placing it back into the evidence pouch. "This apartment was never their destination," he said calmly. "It was their collection point." I looked at him, confused. "I do not understand." He met my eyes. "Someone wanted information connected to my organization. They believed your life would eventually intersect with mine." Before I could process what that meant, one of Damien's captains entered carrying a secure tablet. "Boss, the fall shipment schedule moved exactly as predicted," he reported. "It was copied from our internal system less than 40 minutes ago." Damien accepted the tablet. "Did it reach Bellini?" The captain shook his head. "No, it never left the city. The transfer stopped inside one of our financial offices." Damien remained completely still. "So the leak is internal from beginning to end," he said quietly. Every person in the room understood the importance of that conclusion. The rival family had benefited from the stolen information, but someone inside the Moretti organization had been directing the operation all along. Damien handed the tablet back without the slightest change in expression. "Continue exactly as planned," he ordered. "Nobody confronts the suspect. I want every conversation, every meeting, and every financial transfer documented before anyone moves." The captain nodded immediately and left. I looked around my apartment, suddenly feeling as though I had never truly lived there alone. Was I ever in real danger? I asked softly. Damien answered without hesitation. "You were never the objective." I waited for him to continue. "Then why me?" For the first time that evening, his gaze shifted toward the anonymous photograph resting on my kitchen table. "Because someone believed you would eventually lead them to the only person they could not defeat directly." At that exact moment, Damien's secure phone vibrated. He read the incoming message once before quietly slipping the device back into his pocket. "The traitor just made another mistake," he said. "This one cannot be hidden anymore." The next morning began with heavy rain tapping against the hospital windows, but for the first time in weeks I noticed something different. The gray-coated man never appeared. Every entrance remained crowded with patients. Nurses hurried through the corridors carrying charts, and ambulance sirens echoed outside exactly as they always had. Yet the invisible weight pressing against my shoulders felt slightly lighter. I kept reminding myself that nothing had truly changed. Somewhere beyond those walls, Damien Moretti was still searching for the person who had quietly reached into both our lives. By noon, I was helping an elderly patient complete discharge paperwork when my phone vibrated inside my pocket. The message came from an unknown number once again, but this time it contained only a single photograph. It showed Ryan entering a downtown office building at 7:30 that morning. The caption beneath it read, "Do not follow him." Before I could decide what to do, the image disappeared from my screen as though it had never existed. Across Manhattan, Damien stood inside the executive conference room of the Moretti estate, surrounded by his senior captains. The atmosphere remained calm despite the growing pressure surrounding the organization. Financial reports, surveillance images, and shipping schedules covered the digital display across one wall. Damien reviewed every document in complete silence before finally speaking. "The listening device, the surveillance, and the false shipment all point toward the same conclusion," he said. "Someone inside this family believes they understand how I make decisions." One captain asked quietly, "Should we suspend operations until the investigation is finished?" Damien shook his head once. "No. A mafia boss who reacts out of fear has already surrendered control. Business continues exactly as scheduled." Every man at the table nodded immediately. Damien then selected another file from the screen. "The financial office copied our false shipment plan because someone instructed them to. Trace every authorization connected to that transfer. I want every conversation documented, every meeting recorded, and every account examined before anyone realizes we are watching." His captains immediately began carrying out the orders. Damien remained focused on the larger picture. Protecting Claire was never separated from protecting the Moretti family. Both had become pieces of the same strategy, and he refused to sacrifice either one through impatience. Late that afternoon, my shift finally ended. As I walked toward the employee parking garage, I noticed a familiar black luxury sedan parked near the exit. One of Damien's security specialists stepped out before I reached my car. He remained several feet away, careful not to alarm anyone nearby. "Miss Bennett," he said respectfully, "Mr. Moretti asked me to deliver this." He handed me a small sealed envelope. Inside was a simple business card with Damien's private number and a handwritten sentence on the back. "Trust your instincts before your fears." I looked up, surprised. Why would he send this? The man offered a faint smile. "Because the boss believes you are beginning to notice details that everyone else ignores." Before I could respond, his earpiece crackled softly. He listened for several seconds. Then his expression became more serious. "Please go straight home today," he said. "Mr. Moretti has just confirmed something important." "What happened?" I asked. The security specialist glanced toward the street before answering. "The person leaking information attended today's executive meeting inside the Moretti estate." My heartbeat quickened. "Then Damien knows who it is?" The man hesitated only briefly. "He knows the traitor was sitting at his own table. What he does not know yet is whether that person has been working alone." The drive home should have felt ordinary, but every passing car seemed to carry another unanswered question. I kept replaying the security specialist's final words until they became impossible to ignore. The traitor had been sitting at Damien Moretti's own table. That single thought changed everything I believed about his world. If someone close enough to attend the highest meetings of the Moretti family could secretly work against the organization, then no place was truly safe. The following morning, I returned to County General before sunrise. My shift began quietly, giving me just enough time to prepare medications before the emergency department filled with patients. Around mid-morning, an elderly woman smiled as I adjusted her blanket. "You always notice the little things," she said softly. Her words stayed with me because they reminded me of something Damien's security specialist had said the previous evening. "The boss believes you are beginning to notice details that everyone else ignores." For the first time, I stopped dismissing my own observations. I remembered Ryan checking his phone every time we left the hospital. I remembered the identical gray sedan parked outside my apartment on 3 different weekends. I remembered seeing a silver lapel pin on the gray-coated man's jacket, a small symbol shaped like a falcon. Hours later, while organizing patient files, I froze. One of the hospital's private contractors wore the exact same silver falcon pin clipped to his identification badge. He pushed a supply cart through the hallway without looking at anyone, but the symbol immediately caught my attention. Before I could approach him, he disappeared through a restricted service corridor marked for authorized personnel only. Instead of chasing him, I quietly wrote down the contractor's company name and badge number on a folded prescription note. Across the city, Damien entered the private council chamber beneath the Moretti estate, where only the highest-ranking captains and advisors were permitted. The atmosphere remained calm despite the growing investigation. Damien stood at the head of the long table, while reports from every district arrived one after another. No one noticed that several documents placed before the council contained intentionally different information. Each version carried a unique detail that only one advisor could see. Damien spoke calmly. "Operations continue exactly as planned. Nobody changes schedules. Nobody contacts outside families without my approval." The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. As each advisor left the room, Damien remained behind with his most trusted captain. Within minutes, encrypted notifications began arriving from surveillance teams positioned across the city. One of the false details had already appeared inside an intercepted communication. Damien studied the report without satisfaction or anger. He simply circled one name with a black pen. "We have identified the channel," his captain said quietly. Damien closed the folder. "Not yet. We have identified the messenger. I want the person who believes they own the messenger." Late that afternoon, I finally left the hospital. Before driving home, I called the number Damien had given me. He answered immediately. "I remembered something," I said. The man watching me wore a silver falcon pin. "I saw the same symbol today on a hospital contractor's badge." Silence followed for several seconds before Damien spoke again. "Do not mention that symbol to anyone else." His voice remained calm, but I recognized something new beneath it. Certainty. Why? I asked. Damien answered with quiet precision. Because the Silver Falcon has never belonged to the Bellini family. My heartbeat stopped for an instant. Then who does it belong to? His reply came without hesitation. Someone much closer to my empire than I expected. The rest of that evening passed in complete silence, but my mind refused to slow down. I kept staring at the Silver Falcon I had sketched from memory onto a small notepad. It looked ordinary enough, yet Damien's reaction had transformed it into the most important clue I had ever found. By dawn, I had almost convinced myself that I had imagined the entire conversation. Then my phone rang just before my shift began. "Claire," Damien said calmly. "Has anyone mentioned the symbol to you since yesterday?" "No." "Good. Keep it that way." Before I could ask another question, he ended the call. The conversation lasted less than 20 seconds, but it carried the unmistakable weight of something much larger unfolding beyond my sight. Across the city, Damien Moretti entered the private archive beneath the Moretti estate where only the boss and 2 senior custodians possessed access. Dust covered decades of carefully protected records documenting alliances, rivalries, and family histories. Damien placed the drawing of the Silver Falcon beside an old leather ledger. One elderly advisor quietly opened the book to a page that had not been touched for years. "The Falcon Circle," the advisor said. "They were never a family. They were brokers. They survived by placing trusted people inside powerful organizations." Damien studied the faded emblem without speaking, including mine. The advisor lowered his eyes. "We believe they disappeared years ago." Damien closed the ledger. "They adapted." He immediately ordered every financial division, shipping office, and internal communication channel to continue operating without interruption. Nothing about the Moretti organization appeared different from the outside. Meetings continued. Deliveries continued. Negotiations continued. Yet beneath that calm surface, Damien quietly reassigned trusted captains, isolated sensitive information, and divided responsibilities into separate compartments so no single advisor could access the complete picture. He was not defending his empire by retreating. He was tightening control one decision at a time while allowing the hidden network to believe nothing had changed. Meanwhile, I returned to County General, determined to focus on my patients. During my lunch break, the hospital maintenance supervisor stopped beside the nurse's station carrying a clipboard. "We are replacing identification badges for outside contractors next week," he said casually. "Corporate requested it." I thanked him politely, but one detail immediately stood out. The contractor wearing the Silver Falcon badge had vanished overnight, and no one seemed to know where he had gone. Later that afternoon, I checked the visitor log from the previous week while helping a receptionist organize paperwork. The contractor's company name appeared only once, even though I had seen him in the building several different days. Someone had altered the records. I quietly photographed the page with my phone before locking the file cabinet. That evening, I sent the image to Damien using the secure number he had given me. Less than 5 minutes later, he called. "You just confirmed something my investigators could not prove," he said. "The hospital was never chosen because of you." I frowned. "Then why was it important?" Damien answered without hesitation. "Because someone inside my organization arranged regular meetings there where nobody would think to look." I leaned against the kitchen counter, struggling to absorb the revelation. "Does that mean the traitor has been using the hospital all along?" "Yes," Damien replied. "And tomorrow morning, every person involved believes they are attending one final meeting." His voice remained steady, but I recognized absolute certainty behind every word. "This time," he said quietly, "they are walking into a room that belongs to me." Morning arrived with clear skies over Manhattan, but the city felt unusually quiet, as though it were holding its breath. I reported to County General Hospital before sunrise, determined to treat the day like every other shift, even though I knew it would not be. Damien Moretti had already set his final plan in motion. Somewhere beyond the emergency department, the most powerful mafia boss in the city was preparing to confront the hidden network that had quietly grown inside his own empire. He had never abandoned his responsibilities. Even while protecting an ordinary nurse, he remained the unquestioned leader of the Moretti family, directing every decision with the patience that had kept his organization standing for years. Shortly after 8 o'clock, One of the hospital conference rooms was reserved for what appeared to be a routine contractor meeting. Maintenance supervisors arrived. Supply representatives checked attendance. Security officers walked the halls without drawing attention to themselves. Everything looked perfectly ordinary. That was exactly how Damien wanted it. Hidden throughout the building, trusted members of the Moretti family quietly observed every entrance, while local business inside the hospital continued without interruption. Patients received treatment. Nurses completed rounds. Life carried on, unaware that two completely different worlds had briefly crossed paths beneath the same roof. Less than 30 minutes later, Damien entered the conference room through a private corridor. He wore the same calm expression I had seen from the very beginning. No raised voice. No dramatic entrance. Only absolute confidence. The people waiting inside slowly realized the meeting they expected was never going to happen. Damien placed several folders on the table. Each contained financial records, communication logs, surveillance photographs, and timelines connecting the hidden network that had quietly manipulated members of the Moretti organization for months. No accusation came first. Only evidence. Silence filled the room as every carefully prepared document answered another question before anyone could ask it. The truth became impossible to deny. The Falcon Circle had never controlled the Moretti family. They had only survived by convincing trusted people to make small compromises until those compromises became dangerous. Damien had uncovered the entire structure without allowing his empire to fall into panic. His captains calmly secured every remaining document while the hidden network collapsed under the weight of its own deception. By late afternoon, the investigation was over. The Moretti family continued operating exactly as it had the day before, except the people responsible for betraying Damien's trust no longer held positions of influence. His authority had never weakened. If anything, it had become stronger because every captain had witnessed the discipline of a leader who refused to act before understanding the complete truth. Several days later, I returned to my normal routine at County General Hospital. The anonymous photographs stopped arriving. The gray-coated observer never appeared again. The uneasy feeling that had followed me for weeks slowly disappeared. One afternoon, a large anonymous donation funded a complete renovation of the pediatric rehabilitation unit. Hospital administrators praised an unknown benefactor, but I recognized the quiet signature behind the generosity. Damien never searched for recognition. He preferred lasting results. A week later, I finished another exhausting shift and walked outside just as the evening sun settled across the skyline. A familiar black sedan waited at the curb. Damien stepped out, still wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit, every bit the composed Mafia Boss who continued leading the Moretti family with quiet authority. He looked toward the hospital entrance before meeting my eyes. "Did you finally get some rest?" he asked. I smiled for the first time in what felt like months. "I am getting there." He nodded once, satisfied with the answer. His phone vibrated almost immediately. Another meeting awaited him. Another decision needed the attention of the Mafia Boss who never stopped carrying the weight of an empire. He slipped the phone into his pocket, offered a small respectful nod, and returned to the waiting car. Watching him leave, I finally understood that real strength was never measured by fear or power alone. Sometimes it was measured by the quiet choice to notice another person's hidden pain, protect them without asking for anything in return, and continue carrying impossible responsibilities without ever forgetting what it meant to remain human.